After a ton of suggestions from you, I am finally building out a complete rock, paper, scissors game, which you can see off to the side. So let's get started now. But first, I want to give you an entire year of free hosting. And that's by using today's video sponsor, Atlantic.net Hosting. They're giving you an entire year-long free trial of their hosting, and if you use the code Kyle when you check out, you're going to get an additional $50 of credit you can use towards whatever you want. On top of that, these servers are incredibly powerful, they have great data reliability and redundancy, so you don't have to worry about your data disappearing or going offline. Make sure you check out Atlantic.net using the link down below. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Now to get started, I have the working version of our rock, paper, scissors game on the right. And as you can see, if I choose, paper, for example, you can see that it's a draw. If I choose rock, you can see that the computer won. Let's try scissors a couple times, and then you can see eventually we have won. Our score is being tallied up here, so you can see the computer has won 3 times, I've won once. So there's quite a lot of logic going into this, and I'm going to show you exactly how to build this and style this. So to get started, we're going to need an index.html file. This is going to be for all of our HTML. Just click exclamation point, hit tab. That'll generate the boilerplate for us. And inside of this boilerplate, we're going to need to put our code for rendering out all of our different emojis here, as well as this bottom section. So to get started, let's do our selections, which is just going to be a div. We're going to call it selections. And then inside of here, we're going to want 3 different buttons. And each one of these buttons is going to be these 3 emojis over here. So let's create a button, and this button is going to have a class, which is going to say selection in order to indicate each one of our individual selections. And instead of using any fancy images, I just decided to use emojis. So you can just search for these emojis and copy them directly into your text editor, and they'll actually render out in HTML. I can show you if I save this and open this up. Should pop over here. You can see the emoji has been rendered inside of our page. So we have this fist emoji for our rock button. Then we're going to have a paper emoji. So let me just copy over the paper emoji. And then lastly, we're going to have a scissors emoji. So let me just make sure we get that copied in as well. And now when we save, you can see we have our 3 different emoji options, just like we have over here. Obviously, they're not styled correctly, but we'll get to that eventually. Now, the next thing I'm going to work on is another div down here, and this is going to be our results section. Just like that. And this results is what's going to contain all of this information. For example, our U and computer, as well as all of the different emojis to show what has happened so far in the game. So let's first do the U and computer section. So we have U. And then we're going to do the same thing, but for the computer. And inside of each one of these, we're going to have our score. So let's just put this on a new line to make it easy to work with. And that score is going to be inside of a span. And for example, we'll start with a score of 0 on each person. We can come down here, do the same exact thing. And these spans are going to have some classes. And we're going to call this class here result score, just so we can style this score to be slightly lighter color, because if you look over here, you can see that the font is just slightly smaller, so it's easier to see that it's not part of the name U. So there we go, we have our scores, we have our results, our name, U, computer, as well as all of our different selections here. And as you can see, all of our information is displayed over here. So let's create a styles.css, and we'll create a script.js while we're at it, and let's import these into our index.html. So we're going to have our script tag, which is going to be script.js, and we're going to defer that to load after our HTML. And we're going to link in here our styles.css. So now what we can do inside of our styles, just to make sure this is working, let's just set a background color to be equal to CCC. And if we save, you can see that we now have that background color being applied, so we know our styles are linked up to our sheet over here. The next thing to work on is going to be centering these 3 buttons. As you can see, they're centered in the middle of the screen here. So to do that, we have our selections style that we can select here, and we can use just display of flex with justify content in the center. And as you can see, that center aligns all of our items and gets rid of the annoying space in between them. Now the next thing to work on is going to be each one of our individual selections. So we'll say dot selection. That's each one of these individual buttons. We're going to get rid of the background. We're going to get rid of the border. And we're going to get rid of the outline. And if we save, you can see that now that is all gone. We also want to make sure we have the correct pointer cursor. So we'll say cursor pointer, that when we hover, we get that nice little clickable icon. Also, I want to take our font size and let's just double it. We'll do 2 rem. That way we have really large images. And then on hover, to make sure that we know that these are clickable, let's select our selection on hover. And I just want to set a simple transform to scale up this image. So we'll say scale of 1.1. As you can see, now these are growing. Let's actually make that 1.2. I think it'll look a little bit better. 1.2, and there we go. Now it looks a lot better. It's growing quite a bit more. It's more noticeable. But right now it's instantaneous. As you can see, it just grows immediately. And I want to make it kind of slowly grow and then slowly shrink. So we can use a transition to do that. So we can say transition, and we want to transition over 100 milliseconds. Now, as you can see, they're going to grow and shrink over a course of 0.1 second. And I think that just gives it a more lively look and a little bit smoother animation, which makes it easier on the eyes. So that's pretty much everything we need to do for this top section here for selecting our different rock, paper, or scissors selections. Now the next thing to work on is going to be this results section down here. And we're actually going to use CSS Grid in order to lay this out perfectly. So we can say we have our results, and this is going to be display of, grid, and we want to make sure this is in the center. So we'll justify in the center. There we go. We have it in the center just like that. Now the next thing to work on is going to be getting our 2-column grid. So we can say grid template columns is just going to be repeat twice 1fr. And now if we save, you can see we have a 2-column grid and each one is equal size, which is what that 1fr means. Another thing I want to do is make sure that our text is always going to be in the center. So we can just say justify items center and align items in the center. As you can see, that pushes our text into the center, and as our screen grows, you can see that that stays in the center, which is exactly what we want. And lastly, I just want to add a little bit of margin on the top. We'll say 1 rem, just to give us some space between our emoji picker and then our bottom down here where we're actually having our results. Now the next thing to work on is that score section. So we'll say result score. And this result score, I essentially just want to shrink. So we'll give it a little bit of space on the left-hand side by just saying 1 rem. That'll space it out a little bit. And instead of 1 rem, let's make this 0.1 rem. I still want it to be pretty close to the actual name here. And then we're going to change our font size to just be half. We'll say 0.5 rem. And we'll make the color slightly less black by just making it 333, which is kind of a dark gray. As you can see, that shrunk down, become a little bit lighter, and it just makes it so it's distinct from our actual text of you, saying that this is the actual person's name, and then this is their score. Now lastly, we want to actually see what it'll look like when we have different results inside of our results div. And these are just going to be a div, which are going to have a class, which is going to say result, selection, and then it's going to have an emoji inside of it. So let's say that you chose rock the first time, and the computer chose scissors. So since rock beats scissors, we're going to give this one another class of winner. So now you can see we have our emoji for rock and our emoji for scissors here. And then inside of our styles, we have our result, result, selection. And we also have our result selection.winner. And all we want to do with our result selection is just change the opacity to 0.5. That way it kind of blends into the background a little bit, as you can see here. And then for our winner, we're going to take the opacity, we're going to make it 1, and we're also going to take the font size and bump it up to 1.5 rem just to make it larger. So now you can see that the winner is showing up as a larger font size. It's not opacity of 0.5, so it's completely opaque, while the loser has that more transparent, smaller size. So it's really easy to see visually which one is the winner at first glance. So now let's just remember what this looks like. We're going to comment this out for now because we're going to dynamically add this inside of our JavaScript whenever someone makes a selection up here. And speaking of the JavaScript, we can immediately move on to our JavaScript. And the first thing I want to do is to get all of our different selection buttons. So we can just say that's document.query selector all. And we want to get based on our attribute here, which is selection. And instead, I'm going to use a data attribute called data selection. And this is going to be set to what this actual value is selecting. So we have rock, paper, and scissors. So let's just make sure we write that in. And this is just so that when we actually click a button, we can tell which button we're clicking, whether it's rock, paper, or scissors inside of our JavaScript. So now I can just use that data selection data attribute to select inside of our JavaScript. And And then we can take our selection buttons, and for each one, we want to run some code. So we'll say selection button. We want to set an event listener. So add event listener. This is going to be on click, and we want to run some code inside of here, and it's going to take in an event here. And all I want to do is get the name from this data selection here. So I can say selection button dot data set, dot, and I would want to get the selection. This is going to give us that name here. So we can just say selection name is going to be equal to that selection here. Then we want to make a selection. So we're going to call a function called make selection. And for now, we're just going to pass in that selection name, but this is going to change in a little bit. So down here, we're going to have a function called make selection with our selection. And then all I want to do in here for now is console.log out our selection just to see if this is working. So let's inspect over here. I'm going to drag this over so we can see. When we click on rock, it should say rock. And there we go. Click on paper, it should say paper, and scissors should say scissors. So all of our code is hooked up properly. When we click a button, we're running the code and just printing out our selection right now. The next thing to do is to actually get our selection, render the emoji down here, and determine who the winner is. So a really easy way to do that is going to be using essentially a constant variable of all of our different possible selections. And this is going to be a global variable that won't change. So we're going to put it in all caps. And this is going to be an array of all of our different possible selections. So our first selection has a name of rock. We need to put in the emoji here. And the emoji for this, if I just copy it from our HTML, is going to be this emoji here. That way we know what to actually print inside of down here for you or computer. And then lastly, the most important portion of this is going to be beats. And this is saying, what does rock beat? Well, it beats scissors. So we're going to put in that rock beats scissors. Let's do the exact same thing, which is going to be for paper, which beats rock. And we're going to have scissors, which of course beats paper. And let's copy over those emojis. So we have our paper emoji here, and we're going to have our scissors emoji. And let's paste that down here. So now we have all of our possible different selections here. And now instead of passing our selection name down, let's get our individual selection. So we can say selections.find. We want to find from our selection which one shares the same name. So selection.name is equal to selection, name, just like that. And this is going to be our selection, just like that. So that equal here. So essentially we're just looping through all of our different sections and finding the one that has the exact same name as our selection name here. And let's pass that down to make selection instead. Now if we inspect again, click on rock, you can see we get name rock, we got our rock emoji, and we says it beats scissors. Same thing here for paper, and lastly the same thing for scissors. So again, everything is working as before, but now we have all the information we need in this one object to determine who the winner is, as well as what emoji to print out. All that's left to do is automate what the computer is going to select, and in our case it's just going to be a random selection. So we'll just say function random selection, and this random selection is just going to first get an index from our array. So we're going to say random index is going to be equal to math.random. This is going to give us a random number between 0 and 1. So if we multiply this by selections.length, what this is going to do is give us a number between 0 and it's going to be selections.length, which in our case is 3 here. So it's going to give us a number between 0 and 3, but it can't actually give us 3. The biggest it'll give us is 2.9999999. So what we can do is say math.floor of that, and what this is going to do is it's going to give us a number between 0 and 2. So it's either going to be 0, 1, or 2, which is perfect because those are the only 3 indexes inside this array, 0, 1, and 2. So then what we can do is just return selections of that random index, and this is going to give us a random selection every single time we call this function. So we can say here, computer selection is going to be equal to that random selection. And let's actually print out our selection. I'm sorry, let's just print out the computer selection here for now to see if this is working. So every time we click a selection, it should give us a random one. So we see we got paper, scissors, paper, paper, rock, scissors, scissors, scissors. So as you can see, every time we click, it's giving us a completely random selection, which is exactly what we want. Now all we need to do is write the logic for showing which one of our selections we made and determining who the winner is. So let's create a really simple function for determining the winner. We can say function is winner, and this is going to take a selection as well as the opponent's selection. And all this is doing is just checking to return our selection.beats is equal to the opponent selection.name. Because as you remember up here, rock beats scissors, so the beats version of rock is scissors. So if the name of the opponent selection is also scissors, then we know that the rock has beaten the scissors. So that's what we're checking down here. And now we can determine here if you're a winner is going to be equal to is winner of your selection and the computer selection. And we can also check if the computer is a winner by saying is winner of the computer selection first versus your selection. So now we know if you won, if the computer won, or if nobody won and it was just a draw. Now, pretty much the last step that we have is going to be rendering this out to the screen so we can see who the actual winner was. So in order to do that, we're again going to create another function. We're going to call this add selection result. And it's going to take in a selection as well as if this selection is a winner or not. That way we can add that winner class if it is a winner. So again, up here, we're going to call add selection result. And first we're going to pass in our computer selection and we're going to pass in our computer winner. And we're going to do the next thing with the your winner as well as your actual selection here. And the reason we're passing in the computer selection first and then your selection second is because we're actually going to be inserting these elements. Instead of adding them to the end, we're actually going to insert them directly after this text computer here into our grid. So the first thing we enter is going to be the computer, which is going to show up under you. And then we're going to enter in the your selection, which is going to go after computer, but before the selection that we entered previously, which is going to put it inside of the you column, because it's going to be inserted in between the computer selection and your selection. That way, when we select something, for example, rock, it shows up at the very top of our list instead of all the way down at the bottom of our list, because that doesn't really make sense. When the list gets really long, it's going to be causing you to scroll every time to see the selection, and obviously you don't want to do that. So in order to actually put our selection after this computer text here, we need to be able to select this computer text. So in order to do that, let's add a selector into here. This div is our selector, so we'll say data final column, and that is how we're going to select this final column. Then up here, all the way, we can just say const final column. It's going to be equal to document.query selector of that final column data attribute that we just added. And now we can use this final column inside of add selection by saying final column dot after, and we pass in the div that we're going to create into this after, and it'll insert it directly after our computer section inside of that grid. So now all that's left is to create the div so that it looks exactly like our div over here. So first thing we need to do is create the div. So we'll say div is going to be equal to document dot create element. And this is just going to be a div element. Then we're going to take that div. We're going to set the inner text to that div to be equal to that emoji. So we'll say selection.emoji. Then we're going to add some classes. So we can say class list, list.add. And all we want to do is add result selection. This is just this class here, result selection, that every single one of these is going to share. And then if it's a winner, so if winner, then we want to do a very similar thing where we add a class, but we want to add the winner class. So it'll give it that larger look, as you can see over here, so that way we know it's a winner. And then we're adding it onto our div here. So if we save this and click rock, let's see what happens. Obviously, as you can see, when we click this, nothing's happened. So let's inspect to see what the error is. If we go to the console, it says div.innerText is not a function. So if we look inner text here, I called this as a function. This is just a variable we set here. So now if we save and click, you can see this has properly showed up. We click again, you can see it showed up, and the winner class properly went to the computer since they won that one. Click a few more times, see if they choose scissors. As you can see here, now we are the winner. So all of our use cases of winner, lose, and draw are working properly. The last thing to hook up is these different counters here because they're obviously not incrementing. So inside of our index, let's create some selectors here. We can say data your score. And for the computer, we can come down here and say data computer score. And then we can select these in the JavaScript. If we scroll all the way up, we can say const computer score span is document.query selector of data computer score. Let's do the exact same thing, but for your score, and this is going to say your score. Now we can create yet another function, which is going to be called increment score, and it's going to take in a score span. And now inside of this function, we just take that score span. We're going to set the inner text equal to parsing of an int of the current score span inner text. So all we're doing is taking the current text, converting it to an integer, and then we're going to add 1 to it, and then save that as the new text. And up here, we can call that increment score function with your span, and we can do the exact same thing with the computer score span. And of course, we only want to do this if there is a winner. So we can say if your winner, then we want to increment your score. Otherwise, if the computer winner, then we want to increment the computer's score. So if we save this and we click on the rock here, you can see the computer won, so their score went up by 1. Click rock again, you can see it was a draw, so nobody's score went up. And we'll go until we win 1 here. And as you can see, we won, so now our score has gone up by 1. And that's all there is to creating rock, paper, scissors. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other videos linked over here and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.